Well, I decided to do a review now on my 2021 Kawasaki Ninja 1000 SX. The bike only has a few hundred miles on it, but I'm reviewing it at this stage just to tell you what I think of it so far. It only gets ridden for leisure. It gets ridden on some very aggressive back roads, a lot of twisties. Yeah, I wanted to go ahead and talk a little bit about the bike, some of the things that I really like on it, some of the things that I don't like as much. But like I said, in the time it's been ridden, there's just over a couple hundred miles on it. But initially, there's a lot that I like about it. You can see there's not much of a chicken line there, maybe about a quarter of an inch or so. So yeah, I'd like to go over some of those initial impressions with the bike. And I'm a pretty analytical person. I like to get pretty technical with things, so I'm going to be kind of diving into it here. But I bought this just to be able to ride on the weekends. This isn't something I can commute on. I live in a very heavily congested area, and I like to think of myself as pretty safety conscious in that area. I don't like to ride, so out here where there's back roads galore, I think it's just personally more of a fun experience for me. But that out of the way, let's get started on some of the features of the bike, and then we'll get into some of the more technical things in just a little bit. I've got some notes here on my phone. So first of all, we'll go over some of the basics. This is a 4-cylinder. It's 1,043 cc's. It's a little bit bigger than a 1 liter. I'm reading from Kawasaki, 142 horsepower and about 82 pound-feet of torque. This bike does have a slipper clutch, which is very handy. You got to let off the clutch really quickly if you're at too high of a ratio, shifting down, for example, and the clutch will slip instead of locking up the back tire. I've done that intentionally with this bike, and it's been a really good thing, and it definitely works well. So I learned how to ride analog. My previous bike was a Ninja 650. This is a popular transition because this is still a sport touring, and sport touring bikes are going away. There's not as many of them. Unfortunately, it seems like they're dying. So this is the answer to the proper successor of the 650. I bought this bike primarily because of its technology. The power's nice. It's got plenty of power. But there's a couple things I want to go through. There's also some myths I'd like to kind of debunk about this, in my opinion. So it does have an adjustable suspension, so bound, rebound, and preload are adjustable on both front forks, and of course you've got your adjustable rear. In fact, the preload adjuster on the rear is right down here, and this is kind of nice because you can grab this and you literally just turn it. You can feel these notches. It's really nice because it's so easy to adjust. It doesn't take any significant amount of time. It's almost like you can adjust things casually, almost like it's an afterthought. Very easy to do that. So that's something that I really like about the bike. And then let's see what else. The bike does have ABS, front and rear wheel, of course. They call it the Kawasaki Intelligent Braking System. More on that later. There's a 6-axis traction control via a Bosch manufactured, they call it the Inertial Measurement Unit, IMU. 6-axis, so it's looking at pretty much everything. They call their traction control the KTRC. It does have a quick shifter. So when shifting, the shifter will allow you to go without having to use the clutch above a certain RPM, and we'll get into likes and dislikes about that in just a little bit. We have the KCMF, Kawasaki's cornering management function, which is really a toss-up between the traction control and the ABS doing certain things as the bike corners. So looking at lean angle and a bunch of other axes, I should say. There's a few other things that are going on when you're way down there that the bike is always monitoring for you. Again, not a way to ride, I don't think. I think you should learn on something that has no driving aids, and then build the nice to haves up from there if you're just getting started riding. So but definitely it's nice to know that it's there. Okay, and we'll look at a couple other things here. There is Bluetooth on the bike. There's what's called the Rideology app, which, in addition to just giving you a picture of an envelope if you have a text message, or a picture of a phone if you have a phone call you missed, it also integrates with the bike and allows you to adjust some of the various features, particularly separating the power modes, which we'll talk about in a sec, from the traction control modes, as well as a couple of other things pertinent to how the motorcycle rides. And then let's see, we've got the riding modes themselves. So we've got 4 riding modes on the bike. We have Sport, we have Road, Rain, and Rider. Rider being the customizable mode that you can customize with the app. This is, I think, something that's pretty nice to have. It's definitely not something that I really rely on. I think just throttle discipline goes a long way, but again, nice mode to have. And if you're just adding to the safety factor, then why not, right? So still a good mode to have. All right, looking forward, we've got cruise control on this bike. It's one of the reasons I bought it. The bike does see a little bit of highway after the back roads to get back to where I store it. So it is important that the bike can be comfortable when cruising. And it's very unusual to take your right hand off the controls and rest it when you're cruising, but because of cruise control, this bike can do that. You have a TFT display with a lot of displayed items. We'll go ahead and hit the ignition here to show that. So you've got this display which you can change the colors on. You can go through your odometers, your trip AB. You have a real-time lean angle sensor here that also logs maximum lean left and right independently, and logs it on the app. That's pretty cool. See, max lean last time I was on was 45 left and 43 right. So I only have 223 miles on the bike, and then you've got your battery indicator down there, which can be changed, MPG, averages, your range, your average speed, total time last time you rode. So I guess it was 2 hours and 16 minutes was total time of engine running. That's very possible. And then it's 91 degrees out today. It's pretty hot. Shows Bluetooth is connected down there with the time. And then finally water temp, which is available once the engine's running. We're in road mode right now. Kawasaki quick shifter's engaged, about half full on fuel. We'll add a little bit in a sec. And gear indicator, but again, very basic to the point display. We can invert the colors here for kind of a night mode or a day mode. I kind of like to leave it bright for day, but you can certainly change it if you'd like by the push of a button. It's pretty nice. All right, and we'll continue. We'll go through some more things here. It says Kawasaki when it turns off. That's neat. The windshield is adjustable. There's a little tab for it hidden way down here. It's spring-loaded, and then you can adjust it. I want to say there's 4 positions here. 3, 4. Yes, there's 4 positions to this windshield. So I tend to leave it up, but I guess if you're going to do a track day, of course, you'd want to bring it down a little bit so you can really get into full tuck. So that makes perfect sense. And then we have a drive-by-wire throttle, which makes things like cruise control a little bit easier by design. So no cable here. This is there's just, I believe, a Hall effect sensor in here. And very nicely weighted throttle, very smooth. You don't have that graininess of the cable feel to it. So, yeah, just a nice thing to have. Okay, so I'm going to talk about my likes with the bike, and then I'm going to talk about my dislikes. And the dislikes are nitpicky, and you know, some of you may say, well, you know, that's kind of ridiculous, but like I like to get pretty granular with the things I do and don't like about the bike. So let's start with the likes. I love this engine. The smoothness on this engine is just fantastic. Power band, torque delivery, everything feels very linear, which makes it really easy when you're in turns, but it also makes it very user-friendly when you're merging around the highway. I think that the tune is absolutely fantastic on this engine. Again, smoothness is the name of the game with this motorcycle, and power's there for days, as I mentioned before, but the delivery just makes things so much easier of power. The throttle grip spring tension, as I just mentioned, this, I really, really like this. I think, I think this is something that's very easy to get wrong. When you're designing a motorcycle, this could have been too stiff, it could have been too loose. It's got a very nice, consistent feel to it, and I think that's very important, especially when you factor in, I ride this bike for 4 hours at a time. Little things like that, they catch up over time. So I think that's also a really good design of this bike. The stopping power of the ABS. I've read some articles that said that they thought the brakes could be more powerful. I'm very, very happy with these brakes. I've grabbed as much front brake as I possibly can, of course working up to it, just to really try and throw the ABS out. And I can barely get the back wheel to come off the ground. I mean, if I slam on these brakes at 50 miles an hour, I still can't endo the bike. It's just so well calibrated, and there's plenty of stopping power. So I think the brakes on the bike are very well done, especially the materials that they used, whatever compound they're using. I think they got it right. I think they did a really good job. High speed and low speed, they do a good job. Okay, the balanced suspension is the next thing that I really like on this bike. The suspension on this bike is just so well tuned from the factory, and I think it's really hard to get a good balance between eating up the bumps yet being really responsive, especially when going into a corner, but you've got your acceleration and your braking coming off the controls, immediately leaning. Quick flickable things like that I think are very hard to get right in the suspension while making everything comfortable. And I think the way this is tuned from the factory is beautiful. I think they did a very, very good job with the suspension. It's very stable at high speeds. It just feels like, again, smoothness. Everything complements each other so well on this bike. Next on the list, we've got the cruise control function. I like that it's there. I like that you can simply go in and set your cruise control, and then of course you can make changes there. But set or resume your cruise control on off, pretty straightforward. You can roll forward on your throttle to disengage, as well as touching the brake, turning the cruise control off, or touching the clutches to say turning the cruise control off. Front, rear brake, any of those will shut the whole works off. But it's pretty simple to turn it on. You know what I mean? Little things like that. You might think, well, yeah, duh, but simplicity shows over time, I think, and especially when you ride, as long as I do per ride, things like this are important. They add up. Let's see, the display. It's bright, it's simple, and I like the features that we saw earlier. Again, it's a to-the-point display, nothing too crazy, and I like how bright it is. I've got the sun beating down on this today. It's really hot out here, and I think that's really important. It's a very crisp display. I don't know the resolution off the top of my head, but it's fantastic. I think the font size, the text, all of that, little things like that matter, right? And I think they did a good job there. Fuel efficiency, I'm averaging 51.4 miles per gallon. Now, I'm staying predominantly under 4,000 RPM for my brake-in. You are allowed to go over the specified brake-in RPM. You've got 4,000, 6,000, and then ride moderately until your first oil change at 600 miles. And then essentially you can do what you want after that according to the owner's manual. I've read the owner's manual twice, cover to cover, just to try and remember some of these things. And there's people out there that say they're getting only 35 or 40 miles to the gallon. I don't know what you guys are talking about. On this bike, let's put it this way: the 4,000 RPM in sixth is 58 miles an hour. So if you're on the highway, I can understand why you'd have to be higher than that, but there's really no scenario where you need to be cruising above 4,000 RPM if you're below 58 miles an hour. So I'm very happy with the fuel efficiency. Premium, of course, goes into the tank every time, but yeah, 51.4, and I could probably even average a little bit better than that because I'm aggressive up to that RPM as anyone else would be. Low vibration, that's another thing I want to say. A sport touring bike, I think sometimes those things go overlooked. There's a lot of vibration dampeners on the bike. Not so many that, you know, you worry about it and however many years from now all that rubber is going to rot and go bad. Not really. But they're just placed at strategic areas, and I think they do a really good job managing vibration. I get a little bit of tingling in the fingers after so many hours of riding, and that's kind of a given. I'm not going to blame the bike for that. I spent a lot of time on this bike, I should say, even without touching ground, and you know, that stuff is going to add up. But there's other bikes I've ridden for half as long, and you know, your body's just tingling when you get off it. That's not the case with this bike. I think they did a good job with vibration management. Slipper clutch. Again, I've never needed that function personally, but for a more novice rider, it's definitely a nice to have. That way, if for whatever reason you get the ratio wrong in your mind when you go to downshift and you let off the clutch a little bit too early, you don't have to worry about locking off the back tire, right? And I think that's a really good design. And like I said, I've used the slipper clutch function just twice to really see what it felt like, and it's very smooth and intuitive. You wouldn't even know it's doing that for you unless you knew about this. So again, another nice function. I think this bike is very nimble for its weight. A lot of people will talk about, oh, you have to muscle the bike into corners. I don't know what anybody's talking about saying that. I think that's a bunch of bullshit, to be honest. My last bike was an 07 Ninja 650R. That was 421 pounds dry. This is 518. And yeah, it's about another 100 pounds on it, right? But I've never needed to muscle this bike into the corners. And again, there's very little chicken line there. So I've gotten it pretty low, considerably low. And I didn't have to force it down or anything, you know, just you know, a little bit of counter steer in and just lean in and ask it to go low, and it will. I don't know why people are saying it's not. Some people will say that it's not as flickable. Of course it's not going to be as flickable as something like a 250 or a 400, but it definitely leans when you want it to. And you know, unless you're doing some type of aggressive slalom course somewhere, this is more than adequate. Again, there's nothing that this bike lacks to get it down a back road, you know, in a really fun way, or to cruise in a really fun way. Again, it blurs the lines of that balance point between sport and touring really, really well, in my opinion. So I'm very happy with how nimble it is. The customization of the functions on the rider wrap are nice, especially because, you know, some people are going to want to change the traction control from the power settings, and them allowing you to really dice those up is a nice function. Turning off the quick shifter, and of course you can turn that off from the display, from the instrument cluster as well. But you know, the app reporting everything to you, so you can bring it home, screenshot it, you know, kind of see, oh, well, I went this low this time, and my fuel efficiency was here. Here's how much gas is in the bike, so I know I can plan out my day the next time I go to ride it. Little things like that help. So that's another thing that I like about it. All right, and then finally, well, I got a couple more things here. There's LED headlights, tail lights, brake lights, and DRLs on this bike. Now, the headlights on this bike are, they're not asymmetric. So your two upper units here are both low beams, and then your two lower units are both high beams. And this bike, I've never ridden at night, and I don't plan on ever riding it at night. I probably won't, but it just has a very crisp, clean LED look to it, which I think is nice, and there's always a little bit more reliability in there since you're dealing with an LED. The little daytime running lights, they're more or less park lamps, that they're single LEDs at the outer extremities of the fixture, but they give it a nice little accent. You also have an LED brake light / tail light on the back. It's pretty bright when this thing comes on, as it should be, right? It needs to be able to grab attention quickly when it comes on, and I think it does a pretty good job at doing that. And I will say this, the turn signals on this bike are incandescent, right? They're just regular bulbs, right? Nothing fancy here. But at first that bothered me. I said, well, you know, for the price point of this bike, why not put LEDs everywhere? But I thought about this. There may actually be some hidden benefit here. Take a motorist behind you who's colorblind, for example. When you turn on your incandescent turn signal, right, it distinguishes itself just in the way it flashes from an LED, right? You've got more of that dim on, dim off, dim on, dim off, dim on, dim off, rather than just that instant on-off flicker of an LED. So anything that distinguishes them from the brake lights, or anything that distinguishes them from the headlights, even though I feel like it's pretty obvious, there may be some hidden benefit there. You know, they don't glow the same way, they don't fire the same way, and that might make a turn signal to somebody who has a harder time differentiating between orange and red a little bit more easy for them. So that might actually be a good thing. And then finally on the like list is the solid frame and strong feel. I think this bike is very well put together. The frame feels very, very solid and strong. I don't feel any amount of torsion underneath. I don't feel anything really flexing at all. I don't even feel like a little bit of a light oscillation when going over very heavy bumps like I did on my 650. Granted, it was an 07, but I think the frame on this bike, I think Kawasaki really took their time to make sure that everything was nice and rigid and very tight by design, and it's everything is all one. You really don't feel a looseness anywhere on this machine. Now I know it is brand new, but I mean, usually I feel like my last bike had 35 miles on it when I bought it, and I feel like you can detect those things within 50 miles of riding, if that, almost instantaneously. But I think they did a very good job on the frame, so wanted to point that out. Now let's talk about the dislikes. And again, some of these are nitpicky, but I'm gonna let my perfectionism kind of show here, right, and be a little OCD with you guys. The tuning of the throttle open and close, I think, is a little bit choppy on this tune, and I don't mean the difference in the chain slacking itself on the opposite end when your engine's turning your rear wheel, and then your rear wheel, when you close your throttle, starts turning your engine. I don't mean the take up in the chain slack there. I mean that I think Kawasaki could have, and again, guys, I'm nitpicking. This is very, very tiny stuff here. The bike is fantastic, but I think that the opening and closing of the throttle bodies, maybe in conjunction with when the injectors fire, I think they could have smoothed out a little bit of artificialized rev hang. There is a mode I found in the app, and I think any of the riding modes that have anything to do with the mechanical effect can also be done directly through the instrument cluster. But there is a mode I found that intentionally induces a little bit of rev hang when you roll off, that they say is best to use on a track. So that's I haven't been on a track on two wheels. I've spent a lot of time on a racetrack on four, but not on two wheels. So I don't know how that works. I can imagine it is a little bit smoother, but I think they could have smoothed just that initial opening closing angle of the throttles just when you start to open them a little bit more. There's a little bit of a jumpiness to it, but it's barely there. Again, I'm nitpicking. The front brake is a little bit touchy, just a little bit. I mean, you'll grab it, and then you kind of get to about here, and then it kind of, you get a little bit of a dive out of it, and it's like, oh, okay, well, there it is. And I could be conditioned to my old bike, or maybe that's completely normal, and there's something wrong with me saying that. But again, I feel like they could have been a little bit better with making the front brake take up maybe a little more linear. Again, not a big deal. None of these are huge, but that's just kind of how I feel about that. The cruise control, hard to adjust via the display when it's engaged. So I can't duplicate it now, but when you go to make adjustments up or down on the cruise control, you adjust your speed, which is much smoother than going back to the throttle, disengaging it, or accelerating. The displayed range is only there instantaneously as long as you hold the button down. So if you tap the button real quick, it'll just strobe in front of you on the display. I think they should have put it up there for maybe 3 seconds. Okay, now I'm at 57, now I'm setting 58, instead of having to hold it just long enough for it to be there. Again, tiny little things I'm finding that I don't like, but little things like that would make cruising just a little bit easier. Okay, the secondary display I think is useless. So there's a second display that you can trigger in dark or light mode, it doesn't matter, that will show you this kind of graph of the throttle when you go to roll onto the throttle, and then when you go to grab the brake, it goes from throttle to brake, and then it shows you how much brake you're using. And this little graph, it's essentially a half circle. There's no metrics on it. There's no numbers on it, right? There's no units of measurement. It's literally just showing you, whatever that potentiometer reading is by flooding that graph. And you'll see a lot of other people complain about this as well, but as far as the brake graph is concerned, it'll show you that you're under full brake when you're about here. You've got plenty more to go, but it'll show you full brake when you're, maybe 80% squeezing. So maybe if you're on a track and you're recording and you want to go back and review it later, I suppose, but there's no use for it whatsoever on the road. You're never going to be looking at that while you're accelerating or braking hard, of course. And because there's no units of measurement, I wouldn't really see how you could go back, even if you're filming, and critique yourself anyway. I think it's there for marketing and PR. It looks cool on paper, but no practical purpose. So that's a complaint. All right, this is going to be my biggest complaint with the bike, this next one. The quick shifter. Now, the manual says that this should function approximately above 2,500 RPM, right, to be able to downshift or upshift. And I've caught it not downshifting at all at 3,500 and 3,800 RPM. I've clocked this. I go to roll down onto the shifter, and it's locked. It doesn't do anything, and I got to go back to the clutch. I think that's a huge problem. Again, biggest complaint on the bike is that. And even though the quick shifter is really designed, right, for rapid upshifting, especially at high RPM, which I think it does a pretty good job with downshifting, in the event that it decides it doesn't want to work at lower RPM, even though you're above that threshold according to the owner's manual, I think that's a safety issue, because what'll happen is, if it works 9 times out of 10 at 3,500 RPM and asking for a downshift, and then the 10th time it doesn't, now you're grabbing your clutch and you're reconfiguring your brain in that moment. And when you have seconds, you might be okay, but when you have tenths of a second, that's going to be a problem. So I don't like that. It's inconsistent at low RPM downshifting. Another thing that I don't like about the quick shifter, as the owner's manual states, and this is true because I've tried this, the quick shifter only shifts up if the throttle is open, any percentage, and it only downshifts, and I think this is a mistake, if the throttle is completely closed. How many times have you been, on the highway and you're getting ready to pass somebody and you're at 10 or 20% throttle, but you want to downshift? Well, this function doesn't happen unless the throttle is closed, according to the owner's manual, and I think that's a mistake. I think they should have allowed a downshift with the throttle open, and they could have tapered it off at a certain percentage or engine load and, gear, RPM, speed, however many factors they wanted to throw into the mix to govern that. But the fact that you have to be throttle closed to use the quick shifter really means you're just using it if you're slowing down very, very quickly. So I like to think of the quick shifter as, if you're using it to downshift, you're more or less in a panic brake, or you're on the track, of course, right? But you're downshifting to slow down very, very quickly. And then upshifting is, again, to rip through gears. But I was hoping the quick shifter would be a little bit more casual in its function, and it definitely is not from my experience. Also, and this is another complaint on the same subject, the rev matching that the engine does, again, drive-by-wire, and it's just a quick blip. It's not, it's not a fixed rev match, just a little bit of a blip to help you when you go to make a downshift. There's way too much weight transfer. I think the engine is a little bit slow to do so, and I think there's ways that they could have adjusted that latency there. You downshift, it catches, and it will catch the gear pretty well, but there's this maybe tenth of a second delta between the two, and it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's not as smooth as you think it would be. I think anybody who's got a little bit of experience on a motorcycle is going to be much smoother using their clutch. Upshifts, I understand you want to happen instantaneously if you're going all out, so I can get not using the clutch for that. But even when I didn't clutch on my 650, I would just back off the throttle real quick to unload the gearbox, right? And then it would complete its shift, and I never needed to use it. So this quote-unquote quick shifter function, I'm thinking maybe they over-engineered a function that under-delivers in terms of performance and responsiveness. So quick shifting function is my least favorite thing on this bike. A lot of people rave about it. I don't see as much. I do see benefit for shifting up quickly or downshifting in a panic at higher RPM. I can see that, but I don't see the weight of the benefit that a lot of people in the media say. I think it's a nice option, but people are out there, you know, oh my God, this is amazing. I disagree. I think it's just nice, and I'm going to leave it at that. Okay. Next, the mirror size. I put meh on the comments here. So again, I'm going to compare this to my less stylish, right, 07 Ninja 650R. The mirrors were much bigger on there. I think Kawasaki could have gone 25% larger on these mirrors. You know, they're a decent size, of course, and they are sufficient to see behind you, but they could have been a little bit bigger so you can see a little bit more. You know, just get a little bit more of your surroundings into the frame there. I think they could have gone bigger and they wouldn't have upset the look of the bike, but that's just me. So the mirrors could be a little bit bigger. And I've heard other complaints similar to that one as well. KCMF, Kawasaki Cornering Management System. So this is just what I think, but in the owner's manual it talks about the system determining when you're in the corner, when you're at your apex, and when you're exiting. Here's my question. How the hell does the bike know when you're at the apex? Because that's strictly visual, right? Unless it's determining you're throttling on and then starting to right the bike back up right, and then maybe it determines that as, you know, as your apex when you start to accelerate and lean. Other than that, the bike has no way of determining where the apex is. So they talk about how the function with the ABS and the traction control together are limiting essentially the amount of pressure. It's playing with the solenoids on the front and rear brakes based on your lean, acceleration on every axis, etc., speed, gear, all that good stuff, and then adjusting appropriately based on the riding mode you're in or whatever you've configured for the customizable mode, the rider mode. And I feel like the KCMF is a bunch of bull. I feel like it's just a culmination of ABS and traction control both being able to detect lean and respond individually in kind. I don't really see how it's a separate function of the bike. And again, I could be wrong. If any of you out there you know, are mechanics and you're like, no, this is what it is a separate function, that's fine. I just don't see, you know, the explanation says it combines those modes anyway, and with the exception of accelerating, the bike is blind to the curb. I don't see how, they talk about how it does something when you're braking at your apex and accelerating out. I can see braking and accelerating, but with the exception of accelerating while already in a lane, I don't see how the bike would see the apex, and apparently it does. So maybe I'm misunderstanding that there, but yeah, I don't see how the cornering management function is really its own thing. I think it's just the culmination of ABS and traction doing what they need to do together when you're in a lane. All right. The rider mode limits the display functions that are not that customizable. So the upper function, where I was tapping on the upper portion of the two displayed windows earlier, I can't seem to get the same items displayed on the rider mode in the app. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. I can't find it in the manual, and I couldn't find it in the app either, nor have I been able to really find it on the bike. It's very possible I'm doing something wrong, but it seems that top display that was showing like trip A, trip B, and especially the lean indicator, which again I don't use. I just want to know that it's there, you know, if I ever wanted to cycle over to it for any reason. Those have all gone away in the rider mode, and I can't figure out how to configure this. I've been through every menu inside the instrument cluster on the bike, so those seem to go away when you're in the rider mode. I just don't understand that. But then again, the owner's manual isn't too clear on that either, so I might be doing something wrong, or I could be exactly right, but yeah, it seems like it limits the display functions for toggling around when you're in that rider mode. I think the Rideology app is slightly overrated. It is nice to connect to an app. We live in a connected world, right? Everybody wants everything talking to Bluetooth, and I get that. And I think, you know, there's definitely a lot of value in that, especially being able to separate. I think the big one is separating traction control and power modes, like adjusting them appropriately. But again, people talk about the Rideology app like it's so great. It's in my opinion, it's kind of basic. They could have thrown some more adjustments in there, which I think would have been kind of cool. Maybe not too much more, just a couple more things in there. But I think it's slightly overrated, that app. It's a good app, don't get me wrong, I'm glad it has it, but that was actually You know, again, the tech was a major factor in why I went with this particular bike, but it's just something that I think should be said. Now, here's a big gripe that anybody that owns one of these bikes will share with me. For a bike that MSRP is at $12,599, and for me, I think said and done with the 3.49% they were doing, it was the lowest I could find. I want to say total out the door is $15,549. For that money, you guys can't put in the USB port. And here's the thing, the cable is it's maybe 12-18 inches long. It's not long. It's about an hour of labor to install it. You have to pull the sides of the fairings off. I've seen some videos on it. And they want $114 for that cable. It's like $114 or $117 or something for that cable for USB. I don't know what Kawasaki's smoking when they determine that, but to me, that's when you spend this much money on a bike, you know, you should get that as a given. This is 2021 now. Everything has a USB port on it in the world. I feel like you should have it. So I wasn't too happy about that. What I actually did is the dealership wound up putting a SAE connector under the seat as it is with a 10 amp fuse to the battery. But I bought this little USB thing online. It's got a little display on it when you turn it on that shows you battery voltage, and I've got an iPod or iPhone charging cable in here. And I think the total amount of money I spent on all of that was maybe $20. It wasn't much. And that works just as well. So yeah, I'll save the 117 Kawasaki. That's ridiculous. It might be a slightly cleaner installation, whatever. I like this one better, especially since it's behind, not in front of the handlebars. So it's kind of back there hiding by the top of the fork. The panniers on this bike, and again, I might be, any of you guys watching who've been riding a while might be like, no, that's how much they usually are. $900 for those two things. There's a reason you don't see them on this bike. $900 for the saddlebags, the panniers as they call them, right? Okay, $400, fine. You know, $5, all right, I guess that, $250. $900 is the cheapest I can find them for new. To me, that's ridiculous. $900, I get it. There's some paint, some plastic. It more or less flows with the bike while allowing two, you know, full-size helmets, one in each bag, right? But $900, I feel like that's ridiculous. I'd rather wait and see if someone sells them used on eBay and buy them for a third of that in good condition. $900, I think, is too much for those. But again, I'm gonna gripe. And then this is the very last dislike on this bike. The seat foam. Not the first time you're going to hear this from Kawasaki at all, and I imagine it won't be the last. The seat foam isn't thick enough. You'll notice that after about the 2-hour mark, 2.5-hour mark, at least for me, about 170, 5'11". You'll notice that the seat foam could have been a little bit thicker. It's not hilariously thin to the point where it's immediately noticeable or a problem, but they could have done a slightly better job with the thickness of the seat foam. And Kawasaki, if anyone from Kawasaki is watching this, we don't really like having to refoam our seats when we purchase a new motorcycle. So please do something about the seat foam. Put a little bit more in there. I don't think it would kill you. So that's the end of the dislike list. Everything else on this bike is fantastic. And the way I kind of look at it is, if someone would say, if you didn't own this bike now, and this was a friend's bike, would you go out and buy one just like this from what you've learned from it? Absolutely. 100% I would go out and buy this bike right now. I think it's fantastic. And again, the name of the game with this, guys, is it blurs the lines, I think, perfectly between sport touring and sport. And even it has a little bit of super sport DNA in it, of course. It's just, it's a good balance of everything. Now, if you're new to motorcycling, I know you're not going to listen to me, but trust me, somebody who's been riding for 14 years, and knock on wood, whatever's made out of wood, right? I have never dropped a bike in my life. And I've done, I think, 60,000 miles between 4 different motorcycles, 250, all of them Ninjas. Ninja 250 was my first. Then ZX6RR, which made me feel like I had spina bifida, so that was short-lived. Then finally a Ninja 650, as I mentioned before, and now the 1000 SX. I wouldn't recommend starting on this if this is your first bike, just because it makes it too easy to do something stupid on. you really have to respect the machine, and you have to have a really good understanding of physics and the judgment that comes with experience. If you want to get into something like this, I would start on maybe a 250 if you feel like you're really disciplined and you're not going to go out and do something stupid. Then a 400, a little bit more power there, a little more weight, and then go work your way through, I would say, a 650 and then to this. If you make a beeline and jump straight into a liter bike, I just feel like, considering how quick this bike is, and it is very, very fast. Everybody says how fast it is, and it's not crush your spine quick, it's not like, oh my god, this thing, no, it's predictably quick, but it is very, very quick at that. I think it's important to have that discipline there. There's a reason that, again, knock on wood, that I haven't gone down, and I think it's just because I stay very paranoid with safety, and I think about things as far out as I possibly can. I bought this bike for 45 to 60 mile an hour back roads. I did not buy this bike so I could do something stupid on an interstate and put it on YouTube. Okay, those are people that don't live very long. So yeah, that's just a little bit of a kind of side note advice for anyone watching this. But that's going to be my review of the 2021 Kawasaki Ninja 1000 SX. Again, dying breed. It's very sad, but sport touring bikes, I think, are dying. So if this is something you want to get to, or if you're starting off, you'll be able to get plenty of these. They'll even be cheaper by then. But definitely a good machine, and I think Kawasaki still has it. Some things I think they got a little ambitious on. Cough quick, shifter cough. But other than that, fantastic motorcycle, and I'm very, very happy with it. If anybody has any questions, just comment down below, and I'll see you guys next time, I guess. Thanks very much.